Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Third Thursdays offered by the San Jose Museum of Art. My name is Robin Treen and I work for the San Jose Museum of Art. And tonight we're doing another online version of Third Thursdays. We're partnering once again with Mosaic America tonight. And, you know, in November, at the beginning of the month, we celebrate Dia de los Muertos, which is a very specific but very interesting cultural tradition around death and dying and remembrance and how we mourn and grieve, and also how we remember those who are lost. So there's a lot of really interesting traditions around the world, and we decided it would be really fun to look at some of those, and as specific to music. So tonight we're going to be listening to some original compositions that are looking at very different musical traditions that have to do with mourning and remembrance and loss and death and memories of that and what those traditions are like. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my good friend Usha, and she is going to introduce the program for tonight.
Thank you, Robin. Hello, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We are always pleased to be part of the Third Thursday programs because we love the audience we are able to assemble. I'm Usha Srinivasan, and I'm the co-founder and president of Mosaic America. Our mission is to help strengthen American communities and move them from diversity to belonging. And all the programming we do really is aimed at fostering inclusion and cultivating a sense of belonging. And we do this through the use of the arts. Oftentimes, we will commission works that help us not only showcase the brilliant diversity that surrounds us in our communities, but also helps draw attention to the common ties that bind us all. So Music in Memoriam is one of those commissioned works, and it was curated and led artistically by Dr. Ray Furuta, who is Mosaic's musical director. And it features compositions by 5 composers from culturally distinct and different backgrounds and also lived experiences. And they drew inspiration from rituals around death and mourning and composed these new works. And we premiered this right around Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos. And today we are happy to share with you some excerpts from this presentation.
Hello everyone, my name is Ray Furuta. I am the music director for Mosaic America and the project curator for Music in Memoriam. I'm so happy that you could join us this evening at the San Jose Museum of Arts and Mosaic America's Third Thursday. I'm really sorry that I can't be there tonight, but I appreciate you joining us today. So this project was started in the effort to showcase how we're all so much alike, although conventionally so different. And we used the very popular Dia de los Muertos celebration as the vehicle to showcase how cultures all around the world celebrate, remember their ancestors. So we commissioned composers, musicians to write music representing their personal identities, representing Japan, China, the Middle East, Egypt, and Mexico, to showcase how we all celebrate, we all remember together, and we are all so much more alike than we are different. So I hope that you enjoy these selections of Music in Memoriam.
Hope everyone enjoyed that presentation.
Fabulous.
Pleased to bring it to you. And welcome, Chike. Welcome, Kisa, if you want to get on video. So as most of our works, at most of our presentations, we usually have a component of conversations after the presentation. So people can ask questions of the artists and others. And today is no different. But today we have a special treat. We have two wonderful culture bearers representing two very distinct cultures who will talk to us a little bit about the traditions from their cultures surrounding death, mourning, honoring the forefathers, and so on. So first I'd like to introduce them and then we will get started. I want to read out a brief bio. Please meet Chike Nwafia. Chike is an actor, director, educator, and award-winning filmmaker. Chike is the founding director of Silicon Valley African Film Festival, the only California film festival focused exclusively on films by African filmmakers. Chike's creative project includes a multidisciplinary interactive presentation of the African story and diaspora. So please welcome Chike. And Kisa Ocampo is the CEO and founder of the Positive Impact creative and brand agency WeSpark, and a two-time Emmy Award-winning director, writer, and producer for television. She's been lauded during her career with the world's largest distributor of Filipino media, ABS-CBN International. She serves as the vice president and content creator for the Filipino food movement and host of its weekly show, Culinaria Live. Welcome, Kisa. Thank you. So I'd like to get started with Kisa and Chike. And of course, to add to the cultural diversity of the panel, I come from Southern India and I'm Hindu by religion. And we have Robin Treen, who is Irish American. So we have a good mix of people who can weigh in on our what these rituals look like in our own traditions. But first, I would like to start with Chike, and then Kisa, if you would please introduce yourself, your culture, and what these rituals and ceremonies look like in it.
Thanks. I'm delighted to be here to share. As has been said, my name is Chike Nwafia, and I come from the southeastern region of Nigeria. My ethnic group is Igbo. My name, Chike itself, actually, is very interesting in terms of every name from my culture is a combination of two or more words, and from that you get the meaning of the name. Chike is a combination of two words. The first word is chi, which is chi, which is the breath of God, the personification of God in you. My people believe that when God created all, God gave a little piece of himself to each and every one, and that is the chi that the God gave you. The second part of my name, Ike, is power. So my name means the power of your God. Why do I start from that? When we want to discuss or talk about the transition from this life to the next, one has to understand the belief of a people. And so my people believe that life in itself never really ends. This body that we inhabit transitions. And so there's a circle of life starts. The fact there is no entry point in essence. We are experiencing this plane that we are experiencing, and then we move on to the next, and then we come back and we move on. And so understanding that, therefore, we see that, when we are manifesting this physical plane, there are rites of passage, or several rites that happen, rites of birth, rites of naming, and then as one is growing into, from childhood, from infancy to adulthood, up until the final rite that now beats you into the next phase of your spiritual life. And so for us, death and ceremonies around death really are there to, you see in specific things that are done, and we don't have a lot of time to go into all the specifics, but just generally speaking, when somebody passes on, the ceremonies, the rituals that are conducted are all in service of the person's continued journey. And so what happens then is there is a process of preparing the body, washing the body, laying things out, and then an orchestrated process of working, because we believe that when somebody stops breathing, quote unquote, dies, that there is a period where the person's spirit is still around us. And then it is for those of us that those are living here to now orchestrate a process to guide that spirit from this plane into the next plane so that they can fully transition into the ancestral plane. And then they can join the ancestors. So the rituals, the music, the dance, the chants, and everything, the prayers that are conducted, the way people come in and out of the space where the person is lying in state, who is even able to come in. All of those things are pretty much testament to the person's life, and then an appeal of sort to the ancestors to say, you gave us this person, we are returning the person to you. Here is the person's calling card. This is what they have done. This is why we believe they are worthy of coming into your esteemed place of ancestral plane. And please, we beg of you to open the pathway and accept this honored prince or princess and let them come in. Let the gates fling open and let them move. And so all of that happens. And it takes, in some places, it takes weeks, some places it takes days, but that process has to be complete. And when we know we have done it, we believe the person's spirit now transitions into the ancestral plane. Failing which, if for any reason that those rituals are not done or done carelessly, we believe that the spirit never transitions, and therefore the spirit might become angry and begin to visit its anger on those of us who are the living who did not do what we needed to do to get the person off to the ancestral plane. So that kind of, in essence, captures what we do when we bid somebody farewell into the great beyond, as we call it. And we ask the person, please, in your next life, come back again to us, because we believe that the person is going to reincarnate. If not in this lifetime, it might be several generations later. But I will stop until, and I think we're going to revisit some of these issues later. But I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
That was really fascinating, Chike, and I can see the parallels between what you just outlined and the rituals and traditions in my own Hindu religion. But going to Kisa, please tell us a little bit about the traditions that are followed in Philippines. I know that's a very diverse region, but anything you can do to kind of shed light on the parallel rituals and ceremonies and traditions would be great.
Actually, there are so many parallels to many of the things that Chike had brought up. So I want to preface this by saying that so much of what is practiced culturally in the Philippines has been, I want to say, influenced by religion, right? So during pre-colonial times and in ancestral times, a lot of what kind of governed the general practice of spirituality was what I believe is closest to what they now call pantheism, right? A belief that God is in everything. God is in nature, it is in deities, God is among us, and so are our ancestors. Back in the day, what they used to do when people would pass on is they would keep their remains in earthenware jars, and those jars were placed at the mouths or the openings of caves. As a matter of fact, when I was directing a TV series around 3 years ago, I had the chance to visit a tribe in one of the northern provinces called Sagada. And the name of that group of people is Ifugao. So they're called the Ifugao people. What they used to do back then was when somebody would die, they would actually place them seated on a chair until they reach rigor mortis. So you can imagine, like, the person's kind of bent, right? As if on a chair. And then they would have this whole parade of bringing the person from the house where they would have the wake, from the house into this area where it's almost like the side of a mountain. And what they would do is they would raise the chair with rope and almost like break the bone. So, when we were told about this process and this practice, you could actually hear the bone crunching, right? So that the bodies could actually fit in small coffins that were embedded along the side of the mountain. And as a matter of fact, you can still visit some of these holy and sacred sites in a place called the Hanging Coffins of Sagada. So it's pretty interesting. But, once we kind of go into the Christian era, and around 80% of the Filipino people, they identify as Christian or Catholic, there are many practices that have to do with the Catholic or Christian faith. So for example, when someone dies, there's a process of mourning and a wake, which we call lamay. That's usually done at a house or at a mortuary, or sometimes like even out in the street, right? Like they'll put a big tent and, the coffin is placed there with a lot of flowers. And the whole point of a wake is for people to stay awake. Right. So what people would do to do that, to stay awake, is there would be a party, like Filipinos and food. Anytime there's a gathering, there's always food. It's always a party. So, they would have an entire spread of different kinds of Filipino traditional cuisine. There would be music. So imagine like karaoke. There would be card games, even gambling, for people to stay awake. There's also a practice of what we call a buloy, or a donation that's monetary to help in, either the funeral expenses or to assist the bereaved family financially. But furthermore, into the more Catholic practice, there's a thing that we do called pasyam. And sham, which is the root word, translates into the number 9. So what that means is that there is a 9-day novena or prayers that are said every night. And it's because there's a belief that a soul actually stays on earth for up to 9 days after death. So the whole purpose of this novena is to pray for, the safe passage and peaceful passage of a soul into heaven. At the 40th day, there is prayers, a mass, or a gathering. And we believe that on the 40th day, the soul of a person has now, transitioned and moved into heaven. 1 year later, so again, right, we started with 40 days, and then now we're 365. 1 year later, we practice something called babang luksa. Baba is like decline. Luksa is grieve or mourning, right? So it's the end of the mourning period. And now if you go even further down south to the Philippines, where we have a huge Muslim community, the practice primarily is to bury or cremate the dead within 24 hours or before the sun goes down. Back in the day, that practice began to avoid, the spread of sickness during the plague, trying to avoid infection or contamination. But what's really interesting is, whether you're Christian or Muslim, that there is a practice in the Philippines to say the prayers on the 40th day, where we believe that a soul now transitions into heaven. But given that there has been so much colonization that's happened in the Philippines over centuries, right? So with our Chinese influence, the Spanish, and even what we call the Moro or the Muslim influence, what sort of happened, which is the most fascinating part to me, is that so much of our ancestral and cultural traditions have really prevailed. So when I say this, what I actually mean is that there are certain traditional practices that we generally abide by. For example, there's one practice called pagpag, which means to dust off, right? And what this means is that if you go to a wake, that you're not supposed to go home, like go straight home. You need to stop off somewhere, like whether it's a gas station or, down the street, and be sure that you kind of have a stopover before you go home. The reason for this is because you don't want to bring death home with you, right? And in the same vein, when you go to a wake, the practice is that you're not supposed to take home any food or drink or anything that's served. And furthermore, the bereaved family is not supposed to escort any of the guests to the door or to their car so that death doesn't go with them. There's also a practice called, well, it's not so much a practice rather than it is a belief. One of the things that I love about being Filipino is that there's so much of like a spiritual awakeness, I want to say. A lot of people are healers, are gifted with being able to connect with spirits, ancestors, etc. in different ways, right? There's actually a practice or a tradition that we call, not so much a tradition, I think, but more of like a phenomenon, right? I think that's a better word. It's called paramdam. And the root word of that is ramdam, which means to feel or to sense. And paramdam actually means that when someone passes away and you get a whiff of cologne, or you see a butterfly, or you see someone in a dream, that what they say that means is that the person who passed on is actually visiting you to either bid their farewell or asking for prayers. So what's really interesting, I think, like, in summary, I think what's really interesting is that there is sort of a common belief amongst all Filipinos that even after you pass on, that somehow your ancestors are not just in a faraway place called heaven, right? Wherever that may be, but actually it kind of goes back to our ancestral belief that God and our ancestors are among us. And as a matter of fact, I identify as Filipinx American, although I was raised in the Philippines. But as I look around me in this room, I see photographs of my grandfather, my favorite nanny, my grandmother, my uncle, who have all passed on. And I talk to them as if they're still alive, So I really love that somehow the ancestral practice and the ancestral traditions have really kind of like become so predominant, irrespective of what religion you practice in the Philippines.
Fabulous. So fascinating, Kisa. So Chike, you had mentioned that you are a practicing Catholic yourself. And I'm fascinated because I know, Robin, you're well, I wouldn't say practicing Catholic, but Catholic. But and yet the manifestation of these rituals that you have within the cultures are so different. So talk to us, Chike, a little bit about how do you, in your culture, despite being Catholic, you're still maintaining some of those other traditions that predated Catholicism in Nigeria.
Oh yeah, it's actually, and again, even just as Kisa was talking, the thing that is beautiful, and I talk about this quite a bit in terms of the intersection points of Christianity and traditional practice, that a lot of people, in fact, over 70% of people from my region of Nigeria are actually Catholics because of our relationship with the Irish, missionaries. A lot of the schools that were set up back in the 1800s and the early 1900s were all built by Irish missionaries. And so there's a lot of that, and very, very devout Christians and Catholics. But what you find is that what we have been able to figure out a way to achieve an interesting harmony. This happens in rituals around naming, weddings, and in this case, funerals, that people actually go to mass, go to the requiem mass, go do all of that. But then they come back to their family stead and their compound and then perform, do all these other rituals. Not even, in fact, sometimes the Reverend Fathers come in and help guide in the prayers, And so, there's no longer discord. There was a time when there was a discord, when, of course, there was just this notion that anything from traditional society or traditional cultures was from the devil, and could not and would not be allowed in church. But it took time with Vatican Council and all of that, and the push by the African bishops to say, music, drumming is our way of life. This is communication. This is who we are. This is our identity. And if we are going to be Christians, we are actually going to have to practice and use the things that really elevate us to a whole different level. And so there is now an interesting, and yet there's still some very, very, if you will, traditionalist in the sense of the Christian faith that will say, no, don't do this or don't do that. But more often than not, there are some of these elements that you find, even in the way church mass is celebrated. There are things, people bring offerings, and when they're going to do their offering, they're bringing yams and different kinds of things and animal, and these are things from culture, and somehow we're able to understand that when you talk about death and the great beyond, you talk about ancestors. In the church, you talk about saints and patron saints. You talk about moving on to the spirit hovering and all of that. You talk about purgatory. You talk about, moving from there to the next, so there are so many things that tie all of this together. Where the friction, comes is where one, believes that theirs is superior to the other, and therefore the other is wrong, which happened and continues to happen to some extent. But I think we are now getting to the point where the Africans, just on a general scale, are asserting the fact that their practices come from millennia, and they are not inferior to anyone else. And so we are going to take, this, which we are identifying with, but take it on our own terms and make it work. So it's working somehow, yeah.
So I was hoping that both of you could talk a little bit too about, because we started this with Dia de los Muertos and music. And of course, Dia de los Muertos is very much about artistic expression, creative expression, because they make the ofrendas and they make a lot of things. And there's of course music and celebration and dance. And so I was wondering if you could talk about your traditions that touch on those kind of creative expressions, dance, music, song, within your practices.
What I can say is that in the Philippines, generally, our version of Dia de los Muertos is celebrated on All Souls Day, which is on November 2nd. But in the Philippines, people will actually begin to visit the cemeteries and mausoleums as early as October 31st. And believe it or not, they camp out there at the cemeteries. It turns into a party, right? Filipinos love to party. And so therefore, there's always a lot of food, right? So they bring the favorite dishes of their deceased ancestors. There's a lot of music. So whether it's karaoke or people are singing, people love to sing in the Philippines. They say everyone's a singer, right? But what's really interesting is that the very wealthy people in the Philippines, their mausoleums are actually almost like houses with bedrooms, kitchens, and air conditioning, believe it or not, because it's such a big thing in the Philippines that come All Souls Day, they know that there's going to be a party, there's going to be a lot of music. It's all about joyfulness, right? But I think what's really interesting is usually during funerals itself, it's not uncommon, especially in the provinces, to have like a local band walk during the procession from the house or the mortuary into the graveyard or the cemetery, right? And what's really interesting to me is that although, yes, there is an influence of more Christian like worship music, right? There's also a lot of love songs. So it's not necessarily about romantic love, but if you listen to the lyrics of the music in Filipino or in different dialects, it's really about an unconditional, like beautiful love that's almost romantic, but not, like even the lyrics, like one of the songs that's actually coming to mind is called Maala-ala mo kaya. And it literally translates into will you remember, right? But the lyrics are so beautiful. Like, when I'm gone, will you remember me? Because if you open up my heart, you'll see a picture, like a picture frame of you in my heart, right? Like it's so beautifully done. But even more interesting is that the live band music that walks from the home to the cemetery reminds me so much of what I've also seen in New Orleans.
Yes, me too.
Very,
I was just going to say that. Yes. And
Very
the mausoleums that are like houses.
Oh, that's right. They're above ground.
Yes,
Right.
yeah, they're
right.
like houses. And there's whole cemeteries of them, and the bands march in, and it's, yeah.
And the thing with amongst the Igbos and a good deal of, because I'm also very in sync with other traditional cultures within the African region, we don't really have that type of relationship with death. However, the rituals around, when I say that type of relationship, we don't go camp out in the cemeteries and stuff like that. There is a certain reverence of sorts. Not that that is not a reverence, but the way we interpret our relationship to the, to cemeteries or burial grounds is different. That we don't go and do things. However, the process of sending somebody home there are two phases to the actual funeral and the process of transition or bidding somebody farewell. The first is a very straightforward, mourning, if you will. Then the second phase of that is the celebration that happens, perhaps 40 days later, 1 year later. In the ritual around the funeral, because, our culture is such that music is everything. Music is really the theme of life. There's the music for going to the farm, the music for everything. And so there are types of songs and dance that are specific. And in these gestures of the movement and all of that, you could even see the story unfolding before your eyes, that they are bidding this person farewell. And it's interesting the way, very intricate movements and all of that. And also there is a time at the very beginning of the funeral process, the children of let's assume that the person that's passed is old enough to have had grown children. The children of the deceased go with because we have an age grade system, so the people from your clan or people that are around your age will now come to you. And there is a dance and a song that they usher you in with. And oftentimes, the colleagues of the deceased are the first people that come out. And when they are chanting, if you listen, they're actually saying, we are looking for the person, so they're calling the person's name and saying, we're searching. Have you seen this person? Have you seen this? And then there's a response that says, the person is here. The person is here, and it goes on and on and on. And then you would see that later on, when that song changes in the second ceremony, they are actually no longer saying we're searching. They are affirming that they know that the person has arrived. And but then the age grade process of the children coming in, they are coming in and they're singing, and the person whose dad or mom is passed has this very graceful dance steps that they are taking, and they're bringing them in, and they're ushering the person in, and they're surrounded by their peers, saying, we got you, we're here, and all of that stuff. And it's a very, very interesting process. And then 40 days later, as the case may be, a year later, they come back, which, the Westerners now call second burial, because they don't understand that we don't call it second burial, but it is now a celebration. It is a time where we come to affirm that, yes, we did it. We've gained actually a seat on the council in the ancestral life. It's like, we just voted somebody in, and, there's no recount now. We know the person is there. The person got there. The person has been sworn in, and so we've gained an ancestor. And gosh, what else? You can ask the person for anything. They can guide, protect you, all of that stuff. So that part of it is a lavish celebration. It's just joyous. Food, everything is there. And so the music and dance reflect that as well.
And I'm thinking about in the Hindu tradition, and in India, they're so diverse that when I say Hindu, these are general principles. They may vary a little bit by the sect and region and so on. But one thing that I was struck when I came here first was just how death was somewhat sanitized, right? We over here, when somebody dies, the undertaker comes and takes them away, you come back home. In India, it's very raw, right? First of all, you're required to kind of finish with all the rites and cremate, pretty much by sundown. These days, it's different because families moved and migrated, so people have to arrive from out of town. But the body is right there. And they have rules about, the head has to face a certain way, the toes have to be a certain way. And there's meaning behind all of that. But, as kids, we were not shielded from that. If somebody died, kids are right there, right? They're right there. They see what happens. They see the rawness of it. I was telling Robin, they're also people who have the equivalent of lament. right? They're wailing and crying, and sometimes they're doing it in a very poetic way, right? They will say things like, oh my God, just last week I saw you at the grocery store and today you're gone, right? Things like that. But they're very mundane on one level, but all of these rituals and things that happen, and they happen in community, right? Everybody comes, right? Everybody comes. They know that something is happening in this house. Friends, family, neighbors, they all come. And I think they help the family cope with the loss, right? So, and that the structure and the fact that you have to go through these rituals, even though you would just rather just sit in a corner and cry, the fact that your loved one needs to have a safe passage to the next plane. And if you don't go through those things in precisely the kind of prescribed ways, you're going to deprive them of that. That belief gives people the strength to get through those horrible days, right? And it's so fascinating that it's true across cultures.
Yeah, and the affirmation, knowing, like you said, knowing that, and I think Kisa put it rightly, knowing that the person has now become spirit and is still with you.
Yes.
So there's no, this, I think what is so traumatizing is the finality of death. Yes. In other cultures. And so when death is seen as everything has been cut off, the person is gone, vanished. But in cultures like ours, where we know all that has happened is the person has transitioned to another plane. And if we were part of that transition, if we did our part in moving the person up, really, then we have actually gained something. Yes. You know, and then in my culture, we believe in reincarnation, and the person is going to come back. And so, yes, it is painful. It is, nobody's making light of that. There's crying, there's, sadness and all of that. But somehow there is that understanding too, that the person is still here. As a matter of fact, has now elevated, so it's interesting. And all the grieving and the crying and all of that is therapy. Rituals, right. And so people don't go crazy afterwards and depressed, and you're surrounded. There are people actually that are assigned. If the woman whose husband has passed, there are people that are literally assigned from the day it happens. They are with the person. Even if you wish that they can get away, they are tagged on to you for the whole period. Oh gosh. So anyway, but you're right. In my culture, when the person is, resting, so to speak, as we call it, the person's feet have to be towards the door. Yeah. And it's interesting because growing up, if you fall asleep and you move your foot towards the door, they're going to smack you, say, you can't do that, that.
Right. It's really fascinating. Well, this has been so wonderful. I hope everyone on here has enjoyed this conversation. If you have any questions and you want to pop them in the comment section or Q&A, please do. If not, honestly, this discussion has been so enriching. And again, I hope we can all recognize that here we are, the four of us, and look at all the musicians that were also very diverse, representing many different, cultures and traditions. Here we are all Americans, and yet we all have such rich, unique manifestations of our culture, but yet at the end of the day, we are able to relate to each other, right? Compare and contrast, and we're all part of the same beautiful mosaic. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for doing this. This is fabulous. Thank you, Chike, Kisa, and Robin, as always. And folks on this, please do come back for our next program, and you will find us on social media as well as on the web. We are at mosaicamerica.org, and the San Jose Museum of Art is at SJMUSART. So please find us and follow us, and we thank you.
And we thank you too. Thank you very much for joining another wonderful Third Thursday program with Mosaic America. And I just have to have a little commercial time here. We have a couple of in fact, it's actually kind of interesting tied into this. We have a very interesting exhibition opening tomorrow, but the celebration of the opening will be on December 3rd for our first Friday. So I hope everybody will come, but it's called Our Whole Unruly Selves. And it is also about identity, but about our physical selves as well. and how we, how much that's changed and how we feel about that. And the whole idea of flattening your identity into one thing as opposed to the very complicated messiness that is the human condition. And so it's a very interesting, different take on sort of figurative art. So I hope everybody will come out and see that and see us as well. And thank you so much, Usha, for putting together another great program. It was wonderful to have you both here, Keisha and Chika. It was really great to hear about your traditions too. So
we could go on for another 3 hours.
We could go on for hours. I have a feeling this is a huge subject, and it is unfortunate that it isn't discussed much in our culture. And I think that people do want to talk about it and want to hear about it and think about it, especially when you think about it right now. So many people in this country have in the last year been touched by doubt. They say 1 in 5 or 7 Americans has lost somebody in the last year. It's a lot. So we will share by email a link to this program.
It's
a really important subject. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah. And please look for an email that we send out, which will also provide links to Chike and Keisha's work. And we hope that we will see you back here again soon. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.